You don't notice the moment your emergency plan dies. That's the whole trick. There's no dramatic pop, no smoke, no cinematic spark. It's quieter than that. It happens in a closet, in a garage, under a pile of holiday decorations and old backpacks, while you're living your normal life, scrolling, working, pretending the grid is eternal. Then, one night the lights go out, and you finally pull the thing out like an ancient relic. The box still looks expensive, the plastic still shines, the handle still feels like confidence in your hand, and for about 10 seconds, it works like you always imagined it would. Then the numbers start moving in a way your brain can't accept. 80%, 76, 69. The screen is calm, almost polite, while your stomach turns into a knot. You plug in the fridge, because that's what you do in the fantasy, save the food, keep the family normal, and the inverter clicks, thinks about it, and shuts off like it's offended. Or it stays on, but the fan screams like a jet engine, and the hours remaining counter drops like a falling knife. You try solar input because you bought the panels too, because you're not dumb, you're prepared. And it refuses to take it.
Too cold, too hot, input at a range, firmware protecting itself.
The unit is doing what it was designed to do, protect the battery. And the battery, this is the part you weren't told in bold letters, has been aging the entire time you weren't looking. You didn't buy a generator, you bought a battery. And batteries have birthdays. In your head, a solar generator is an emergency asset, a thing you purchase once, put away, and forget like a fire extinguisher. Buy it, stash it, sleep better. The category promise is basically a bedtime story. Pay $2,000 now, and future, you will thank present you when society hiccups. But the device you bought doesn't behave like a fire extinguisher. It behaves like a perishable system. Chemistry ages, electronics sip power, firmware changes what safe means. Time takes a cut whether you use it or not. If you don't maintain it, you don't have backup power. You have a decoration with ports. And here's the uncomfortable part. None of this requires a conspiracy. Nobody has to sabotage you. Nobody has to brick your unit on purpose for the outcome to be the same. The collapse happens inside the box by default, because that's what batteries do, and because marketing language trained you to think batteries are immortal as long as you don't touch them. Marketing language is the villain in this story, because it's not technically lying, it's doing something worse. It's telling the truth in a way that makes you behave like an idiot. It gives you the best case number, measured under ideal conditions, on day one, at room temperature, at a certain discharge profile, with fresh cells, with a clean test setup. And it lets your imagination do the rest. It lets you translate 3,000 cycles to 80% into I'm covered for 10 years, even though that number doesn't mean what your brain thinks it means. You see 2000 watt and you hear 2,000 watt hours delivered to my life when I need it. But what you bought is 20001 saw on a label. Delivered energy is a different beast. So let's build a framework you can actually use, something simple enough to remember in a blackout and brutal enough to cut through the marketing fog. I call it the battery expiration model, and it has 4 clocks running at the same time. Clock 1 is chemistry. Capacity fades with time and use. Clock 2 is calendar aging. Time kills it even if you never touch it. Clock 3 is electronics, parasitic draw, standby systems, BMS behavior, and all the smart features you didn't ask for but paid for. Clock 4 is conversion. Every time you turn battery DC into AC and then back into DC inside your appliance, you pay a tax. The battery is your reservoir. Marketing sells the size of the reservoir. Reality is the plumbing. Now, the first evidence wall is the one you've probably heard without ever understanding. The 80% line. You've seen it on battery life claims, warranties, cycle charts, and product pages. It shows up everywhere because the industry needed a boundary between still basically new and now it's officially aged. The problem is consumers hear 80% and think still fine. Engineers hear 80% and think the beginning of the end of predictable performance. And battery researchers have been very explicit about why that threshold is treated like a turning point. Capacity loss often accelerates past that point, and the risk profile shifts. Not always, not in every case, but often enough that the 80% line has become a psychological cliff as much as a technical one. .com/blogs what happens after 80%. Here's what 80% means in human terms. If you bought a unit because you wanted to run a fridge overnight, 80% is the moment you stop running the fridge overnight. It's the moment your plan becomes a compromise machine. Before 80%, the device still feels like the product you bought. After 80%, it starts acting like a smaller model you didn't pay for. The fridge that ran 8 hours now runs 6 on paper. Then you add inverter losses, cold performance, surge behavior, and suddenly you're gambling with food safety. Your CPAP night becomes a math problem you're doing in the dark. And the cruelest part is that the unit still turns on, it still works. So you keep believing right up until you need it. There's also a bigger point buried in the research world. That 80% cutoff was originally a kind of convention, useful but not universal. So there's increasing attention on what happens beyond it, including knee points, where degradation accelerates and sudden failures become more likely depending on chemistry and conditions. Not knowing T/A/degradation of commercial lithium ion cells beyond 80 capacity slash this is why your state of health number matters more than your state of charge number. State of charge is how full the tank is today. State of health is how big the tank still is. Marketing wants you staring at the fuel gauge. Reality wants you measuring the tank. And now we get to the defense everyone uses. The one that sounds logical until you learn what calendar aging is. I barely used it.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Calendar aging is the closet decay. It's the chemical side reactions that keep happening while your unit sits there, fully charged, in a warm garage because you thought full equals ready. It's the slow thickening layers inside cells, the gradual increase in internal resistance, the way heat accelerates aging, the way storage state of charge matters, the way the pack changes even when you're not cycling it. In some use cases, especially the buy it and forget it use case, calendar aging dominates. It becomes the main aging mechanism, not cycleware. That's not a hot take. That's just how time works, and it's been discussed relentlessly by people who actually build and test these systems in the real world. Com/threads/cycling degradation versus calendar aging dash LifePo 4 batteries used for solar application. 94,487, page 4.
So let me paint you two buyers. Buyer A treats the device like a system.
They cycle it monthly. They store it properly. They don't leave it baking in a hot garage. They actually know what maintenance means in a battery context. Buyer B is the person marketing is designed to create. Buyer B buys the magic box, feels responsible, and shoves it somewhere out of sight. They store it full because emergency. They never test it because it's brand new. They never think about heat because it's in the garage, it's fine. They never think about parasitic draw because it's off. Buyer B opens it during the emergency and discovers they've been paying rent to chemistry for years. Now we need to talk about the most seductive number in this entire space, 4,000 cycles. This number is practically a spell. People hear it and relax. 4,000 cycles sounds like immortality. It sounds you can hand this thing to your grandchildren after the collapse and say, use it wisely. But cycle claims are defined under specific test conditions: depth of discharge, temperature, charge rate, discharge rate, cutoffs. And the marketing copy almost never makes those assumptions emotionally legible. It doesn't explain that cycles are counted in equivalent full cycles, not times you plugged it in. It doesn't explain that calendar aging can make the cycle rating irrelevant for light users who rarely cycle. It doesn't explain that the unit can become obsolete by time before it ever wears out by cycles. Battery cycle life 4,000 cycles explained. Here's the cycle math versus human math problem. Cycle math says if you cycle daily under controlled conditions, you might hit that cycle count in a decade-ish timescale. Human math says you're not cycling daily. You're not in controlled conditions. You're storing the unit. You're expecting it to behave like a dormant asset. The cycle claim becomes this weird marketing trophy you paid extra for, even though you will never spend those cycles. Your unit will age out by calendar and environment before it ever reaches the cycle number, which means the number did its job. It made you feel safe. Marketing language doesn't need to lie. It only needs to exploit the way your brain wants a single clean number, a number that ends uncertainty. And the entire battery industry is a masterclass in clean numbers that hide messy reality. Next comes the chemistry argument, because somebody always tries to solve this by buying a different fantasy. They say, just get LFP. LFP is safe. LFP is 3,000 cycles. LFP lasts forever. No. Better chemistry is not a substitute for maintenance. It just fails slower. Lithium iron phosphate has real strengths. It's widely used in home energy storage because it tends to offer long cycle life and lower thermal runaway risk compared to some higher energy density chemistries. Nickel, manganese, cobalt, and related lithium ion chemistries often trade cycle life for energy density and compactness in many consumer designs. But here's what the marketing debate ignores: both chemistries still age, both still respond to heat, both still suffer from being stored improperly, both still lose capacity over time. And the system around the cells, the BMS strategy, the inverter design, the firmware protection thresholds can still turn your big capacity into not enough when you need it. Practical guidance on longevity still revolves around basic truths: avoid extreme temperatures, avoid living at full charge forever, and understand depth of discharge behavior as part of lifespan management. When NFWWW Clean Energy Reviews, info/blog/lithium battery life explained. And now we get to the most insulting part of the solar generator experience: the invisible drain. This is where you learn that you didn't buy watt hours. You bought watt hours minus thieves. Thief 1 is conversion loss. Battery cells store energy as DC. Most of your household appliances want AC, and then immediately turn it back into DC internally because electronics run on DC anyway. So you do DC to AC in the inverter, then AC back to DC in the appliance brick. Each conversion is a tax. Under some loads, it's modest. Under others, it's ugly. The point is, the label capacity is not the delivered capacity. Thief 2 is parasitic draw. The unit off is rarely off. The BMS is awake. The display logic might be awake. Wireless features might be awake. The inverter standby might be awake. And even if the BMS itself is low draw in some designs, real-world builds can include additional components that materially drain the pack over time. People have been asking this question forever: does a BMS drain your battery? And the answer is yes, but how much depends on design choices, and sometimes other components dominate. speak://diesolarforum.com/threads/dusabbms drain your battery 3771 slash and the consumer facing advice out there admits the same underlying reality. Portable solar batteries can drain in storage due to a combination of self-discharge and always-on electronics, and storage practices matter. nrstore.com/www.nrstore.com/blogs/portable-s solar power/portable solar battery draining storage. There's also a third, meaner layer. You look at the screen and you trust it. But the displayed percentage is not a lab measurement. It's a model. It's a BMS estimate. As packs age, capacity shrinks, resistance rises, and the BMS can be operating on assumptions that made sense when the unit was new. That can make discharge feel impossibly fast because your remaining energy is lower than your displayed confidence. Some manufacturers themselves explain that age-related capacity loss and BMS behavior can make a battery appear to discharge rapidly, even when the system is simply operating with reduced usable capacity and or dealing with balancing and temperature protections. www.com/us/blog/troubleshooting your BMS. So now imagine the blackout again, but with the truth in your pocket. Imagine you pull out the unit and it says 100%. That number might mean full relative to the now smaller tank. And if the inverter overhead and parasitic behavior are non-trivial, your usable window shrinks again. And if it's cold, performance shifts again. And if you're trying to start a compressor load, the surge behavior hits again. This is why people think these units failed, when in many cases they just aged out of the fantasy. Now let's talk about warranty, because this is where the social contract breaks in your head. Warranty is not a collapse promise. It's a legal product promise for a consumer electronics timeline. It is designed for normal ownership patterns, normal failures, normal customer support cycles. And a lot of portable power stations are supported like consumer electronics because that's what they are: sealed, integrated products with a support window. Meanwhile, the buyer's SHTF timeline is not 2 to 5 years. The buyer's mental model is 10 to 20. The buyer amortizes confidence. They buy the unit and think, I'm set for a decade. But typical warranty ranges discussed in consumer facing guides sit in the kind of window that should make you ask an uncomfortable question. Why does the official promise end so early compared to the story you told yourself? And you can see how the marketing is framed on retailer listings. 3000 plus cycles to 80%, app control, firmware updates, UPS mode, smart modes. It sounds like capability. It is also complexity. And complexity is a reliability tax unless you actively manage it. .com/product/bluetti-A60p. This is where I give you the punchline that makes people angry because it's true. If you can't explain how it ages, you don't own it. You're renting confidence. So, what do you buy instead? You don't replace one fantasy with another. You don't go from Magic Box to Magic Box, but different brand. You don't solve this by spending more money on a bigger number. You solve it by buying a plan. Option A, stop buying backup power. Start buying an energy strategy. Identify critical loads. Reduce loads first. Decide what must be AC and what can be DC. Decide whether your plan is overnight comfort or survival level function. The smaller and clearer the mission, the more likely your system survives aging, because aging punishes marginless plans first. Option B, smaller and rotated beats bigger and forgotten. If you're the type of person who will store a unit and never touch it, the most honest strategy is to buy something you will actually cycle and test. The point isn't maximal watt hours on a label. The point is known performance on the day you need it. A smaller unit you rotate through real use teaches you the reality of inverter overhead, parasitic draw, and actual runtime. It also forces you to confront the fact that percentage is not a plan. Option C, modularity mindset. This is where people get tribal and weird, so listen carefully. I'm not giving you wiring instructions. I'm not telling you to build an electrical system from scratch. I'm telling you that sealed all-in-ones can be harder to maintain long-term because you can't easily replace the parts that age at different rates. Batteries age, inverters fail, ports wear out. Firmware becomes a dependency. When everything is fused into one glossy product, the failure mode is whole unit. When components are separable in concept, the failure mode can be replace the aging piece. Even if you never go full modular, thinking modular makes you shop smarter. You ask about repairability, replaceability, service life, and what happens when the screen lies. Now, because I'm not interested in dunking on buyers, I'll give you the part that actually changes outcomes. A field test program, not a theoretical checklist. A repeatable set of simple tests that you can film with generic equipment and that any viewer can copy safely, because the point is not to become an electrician, the point is to become a realist. Test 1. The shelf test. Charge to a defined level. Store it for a set number of weeks in a controlled, reasonable environment. Record the percentage drift. Then do a controlled discharge into a known load and see what you actually get. This reveals self-discharge, parasitic behavior, and whether the displayed percentage tracks reality. Test 2, the night load test. Run a consistent, realistic load for fixed windows. Don't do fantasy loads. Do boring loads, your router, lights, a fan, maybe a DC appliance if your unit supports it. Then do the same through AC. Compare runtimes. This reveals conversion loss and the cost of convenience. Test 3. Mild temperature behavior, not extreme. Not throw it in a freezer. Just compare typical indoor room temperature to typical garage conditions. Observe performance changes. This reveals the environmental sensitivity that marketing hides behind works anywhere imagery. And while you do all of this, you build something more valuable than watt hours. You build a mental model, the kind of model that doesn't panic during a blackout because it has already seen the truth in calm conditions. Now we bring it home, back to the $2,000 brick. The most dangerous thing about these products is not that they're useless. The most dangerous thing is that they're useful enough to lull you into outsourcing preparedness. They make you feel like the messy work of resilience. Reducing loads, testing systems, building habits can be replaced with a purchase. And marketing language loves that. It loves the buy once, be safe story because it sells. It sells to your fear. It sells to your identity. It sells to your desire to solve a complex problem with a single object. But the grid doesn't fail like a product demo, and your life doesn't run on peak specifications from day one. Your life runs on aged performance, on maintenance, on the boring discipline of checking what you own before the emergency forces you to. So here's the thesis, sharpened into something you can't unhear. You're not buying backup power. You're buying a battery with a countdown. If you don't maintain it like a system, it will betray you like a gadget. And the final question, the one that should sit in your mind long after the video ends, isn't, should I buy a solar generator? It's this. When the lights go out, do you want to discover reality for the first time? Or do you want to meet a system you already understand?